Good morning and welcome to another Ethical Corporation webinar. My name is Liam Dowd, Managing Director at Ethical Corporation, and I'll be your moderator for today's discussion. Today's webinar will look to provide practical ideas on how companies can disclose accurate climate data, reporting both current climate impacts plus future risks and opportunities. The Task Force for Climate-Related Disclosures, the TCFDs, provided guidelines for companies on how they can report the financial risk of climate-related impacts. The guidelines, if used correctly, can provide many benefits, not least help identify ways to de-risk the business. However, a recent study found that over 30% of public listed companies still aren't reporting climate-related financial risks. Through our research at Ethical Corporation, we understand there can be many challenges in undertaking this activity. For today's webinar, we have just under 800 people signed up, and we have 4 great panelists for you looking to share their experiences and approaches to help you understand how you can implement the TCFD recommendations into your business, monetize climate impacts, understand ways in which you can conduct a scenario analysis of both current and future climate risks, and also the benefits to the business from adopting the TCFDs. As you can see from your screen, leading today's webinar, we have Janice from the Hongkong and Shanghai hotels, Tjeerd Krumpelman from AMRO, Sveen from UBQ Materials, and Daniel Turner from CDP. So now we'll get things underway, and I'd like to introduce you to the first panelist, Daniel. Daniel, I know CDP has recently aligned its questionnaire to the TCFDs so that companies can disclose TCFD data through your questionnaire and survey process. I know you also have some useful stats and graphs that highlight some early trends that you're seeing and key considerations for our listeners. So could I invite you to join and get the webinar discussion underway? So Daniel, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Liam, and good morning, everyone. Welcome. It's a pleasure to be speaking here this morning. So, yeah, my name's Daniel Turner. I'm the Head of Corporate Engagement at CDP, and what I'm going to do today is quickly run through a quick overview slide of just how CDP is aligned with TCFD recommendations, and then some key data points to take away from the initial results from the 2018. And then just to talk about where this is heading. So first of all, just to make it clear to people, yeah, we at CDP questionnaire has been completely aligned with the TCFD recommendations. The top chart there sort of shows the process. So the route from their recommendations through to a standardized comparable data via CDP's platform. Ultimately, we take the opinion the TCFD recommendations identify what investors and companies should be evaluating. The CDP questionnaire then breaks those recommendations down into accessible, actionable metrics, CDP's guidance, including 2 technical notes that were recently published last year on the TCFD itself and on scenario analysis. They aid disclosures in knowing how to disclose complete and comparable information. And finally, the scoring helps to identify best practice for metrics. The kind of arrows across those boxes at the bottom also just indicate how this has manifested itself over the last couple of years. So 2017-18 cycle, we worked on 15 of the sectors, updated the core questionnaires, and aligned the structure to mirror the 4 TCFD themes. 2018 and 19, we had the first set of data reported on those points, which is what I'll present shortly. And then looking forwards to 2019-2020, we're going to expand to cover most of the remaining sectors there. And the biggest shift for the 2020 cycle is direct reporting from the financial services questionnaire, looking at their kind of where the money is lent to rather than just often at the moment financial services tend to report only on their operations, and so it's going to be expanding that out. Next slide, please. So this very recently we published our climate change analysis called Major Risk or Rosy Opportunity. That's available on our website, along with more interactive data analysis of all the points I'm going to go through. Today, I'm going to look more at the risk data rather than the opportunities data, but there is equally lots of opportunities data that's available. A few key trends that came out of the findings we from the last set of analysis. Companies are identifying significant risks, but they definitely need to expand their analysis. The biggest companies are reporting major financial implications. One very positive outcome is that the opportunities do seem to significantly be larger than the risks, and there's quite striking differences between certain countries and regions. Overall, it looks like the wins far outweigh the costs of management, and there's the power sector has moved quite early on this, and companies, investors can learn lessons from that sector. And just to reiterate, yeah, there's on our website cdp.net there is a lot more interactive analysis where you can really dig into these charts in a bit more detail. So next slide, please. On the board level oversight, one of the key sort of governance pieces, we have noted that the purple line there shows the by country. The bars represent the countries. The purple line represents the number of companies, the percentage of companies that said yes, they do have board level oversight of climate related issues. There's obviously a lot you can drill into below those questions about what that actually means, but I think a few interesting results from here is you know, the yellow dotted line is the average, and so we can see straight away Europe, China, Korea, Australia, Japan, they're all above that average line in terms of the board level oversight. But under the average line is a couple of key examples, USA, for instance, and Brazil. So this is where you start to see divergence from a country level about how this is being reported at that senior level. From a leadership perspective, what we'd really like to see in the sort of the drill down of this information, what does it actually mean? It's, you know, we want frequent reporting. It should not be just once a year. It should be on a multi-month basis. Often leading companies do have remuneration and incentives for senior executives around hitting targets. That's often a very successful driver of action. And we'd like to see some level of expertise around these issues embedded within the board. Next slide, please. Looking at the risks and opportunities just in terms of the volume. So we had just under 7,000 companies reported to the climate change questionnaire last year. And you know, virtually all of them reported some information about whether they're exposed to risks or not. Companies are identifying both. And you can see from that bottom chart, just 32% reported that they did not either identify any risks or opportunities. I would question that, and it might just be they haven't considered it fully. Obviously, some companies will be more affected than others, but I think it's quite interesting that nearly a third of companies say they're not going to have any risks or any opportunities at all, which I think needs to be unpicked a little bit. Next slide, please. On substantive climate risks, there are 53% of companies reporting to CDP that identified inherent climate-related risks. Less than half of the companies with headquarters in US, Brazil, Mexico, Thailand, Argentina reported risks that could have a substantive impact. And at the other end of the spectrum, at least 75% of the companies in Turkey, Korea, Indonesia, New Zealand, South Africa had identified these risks. Where this is split out by sector, which you can do on the interactive charts, it's kind of as you would expect. Companies in the power, retail, mineral extraction and fossil fuel industries have a much higher proportion of companies identifying substantive risks at nearly 80%. Next slide, please. In terms of the risk types, obviously it splits into transition risks, physical risks. So in terms of the transition risks, the most common ones that are reported was the two most common ones were both around the policy and legal piece, and increased pricing of GHG emissions was the most frequently reported on that side, and then mandates around regulation of existing products and services. So they're quite closely related, and they came out as the top. The third one was actually also policy and legal related around enhanced emission reporting obligations. That came out quite high. On the market side, changing consumer behavior was a significant risk. In terms of the physical risks, I don't have a slide for, but we'll just relay to you. It was, again, as you'd probably expect, increased severity of extreme weather risks, changes to precipitation and weather patterns, and rising mean temperatures. So next slide, please. On the top 10 financial risks that were reported, focused really just on those first few there. So it's increased operating costs and reduced revenue from decreased production capacity. And then the two sort of small pink bars, transition risk in the middle, I think they both then reflect reduced revenue from decreased demand for goods and services, and reduced demand is due to the shift in consumer preferences. So there's some trends there that are quite applicable. Next slide, please. Looking at the financial implications, this is quite a key point, and where there is often very comprehensive reporting of what being identified or exposed to those risks, what identifying the drivers, and disclosing the financial impact drivers, actually disclosing the potential financial impact figures is the fourth bar there on both sides for both risks and opportunities. There's much less transparency from companies around reporting the actual financial impact. There can be many reasons for this, confidentiality or sort of uncertainty, but I think without that transparent reporting of the actual financial impact, the full picture is not going to be visible to the users of the data. And that was one of the key recommendations that came out of the first TCFD reports, was the users of the disclosure really expressed the need for more quantitative information about these financial impacts. So next slide. I appreciate I've got probably a few seconds left. So on scenario analysis, this is a key part of the recommendations. And what we saw was there's a wide variation in the number of scenarios used. Many people reporting other and then writing in something that was actually available as a list makes the analysis a little bit harder, but essentially there was much more alignment from the leading companies around just a few key scenarios, whereas if you look at the wider group, there was quite a large range. But you know, over 3,000 companies said that they were asked to report. Half of those, just under 1,500, said they were using scenario analysis. A further 1,000 going to do it in the next 2 years. Interesting, over 700 though state they're not going to do it, which is interesting. And the last slide, please. On the risk management side, 3,700 companies identified their processes, you know, for identifying, managing climate-related issues are integrated. So this is a really important step to move climate-related issues out of that siloed sort of ESG, CSR bucket, and to make it a much more company-wide issue. So it means raising that climate is an issue for legal, risk, and finance departments. Very whistle-stop tour there, and I appreciate I ran through that very quickly. I think the slides will be available afterwards, but yeah, please visit our website. There's much more of those charts and data available to interact with. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dan. Thank you. Great start to the webinar, and yes, you're correct. What we'll be doing after the webinar, we'll be sending recordings along with which will have the slides embedded next week to everyone that's listening today and everyone that couldn't join us. So yes, they will be with you next week. And I've already started having a few questions come through. There's a question box in the webinar software, so that all those that are listening, if you have some questions from the stats and graphs that Dan pulled up, or from the other coming panelists, do get your questions in. I'll be taking note of them, and we've got a Q&A aspect to the webinar in the final half, so we want to make it as interactive and get as many of your questions answered as possible. So yes, do send them in, and I'll be taking note of them. So we're going to now be handing over to Tjeerd. So Tjeerd, obviously the banking sector by its nature is good at one half of what Dan was talking to, the risk aspect. You know, quantifying risk is something you guys do well, and I know you want to share ABN AMRO's approach to this, some of the challenges and ways in which collaboration can help. So I'd like to invite you to take over.
Thank you, Liam, and thank you, Daniel, as well, for the introduction. And thanks for inviting me to share some viewpoints that we have from the financial sector or from the banking perspective. And one of the challenges is in fact already maybe mentioned by Daniel, that all these companies are doing this reporting, but from a bank's perspective, we need the data from a lot of the clients that we are either lending money to or investing in. So that is where the financial sector has a big challenge, and I will just like to share some insights on how we are tackling that together. So next slide, please, Liam. Just to give you a small overview or introduction to ABN AMRO, our purpose is to bank for better for generations to come, and our strategy is all around accelerating the sustainability shift, which is not our sustainability strategy. This is the corporate strategy of the bank, and our biggest impact is with our clients with regards to sustainability. So our objective is there to support our clients' transition to sustainability. And this is very much in line with recommendations from TCFD and others as well, but it requires a lot of data. And we have a 3-step approach on this data that is on the next slide, please, Liam. And it's a real simple, well, to me, it's really simple if you explain it like this. First you measure, then you report, and at the end you steer. And I'll try and give you some insights, some practical approaches on how we do these 3 steps. The first one is on the next slide. It's how to measure. And how to measure carbon for financial institutions is actually, it's a true challenge for all banks, all asset managers, all insurance companies. So a couple of years ago, we joined forces and we set up a platform for carbon accounting. The participants are shown on the screen, and we try to develop an open source methodology on how to calculate carbon that is on the balance sheets of banks or other financial institutions. You can find the report and the methodology on the website and mentioned on the slide. But the interesting about this collaboration is that we feel that if we develop a joint methodology, that the actual numbers will be easier to gather and easier to compare for others as well. So what we found a couple of years ago is that each institution, each financial was developing this on their own, and that was not very helpful. So now this Dutch initiative, or it started in the Netherlands, but it's now pretty soon going global, and we've had a lot of interest from US banks already and in other European countries as well. So that is really taking off, and that is a way to measure. On the next slide, you will see you can hardly see the numbers maybe here, but it's not so much about the numbers, it's about the reporting. So what's very important is once you've discovered or agreed upon a methodology to account for carbon, is that we all start sharing this data, that we all start to report, all financial institutions start to report publicly, transparently on the emissions in either their lending or investing portfolio, or in project finance or other parts of their activities. And the reason for that is then we can share this data more easily. We can compare data. We can learn from each other in this collaborative space. So this is an example of a report that we did last year at ABN AMRO, but there's now around 20 banks sharing this type of data based on the same methodology, and also being very open to improving the data, because this is very raw data. It's a very raw methodology, and it still needs improvement. But by disclosing it this way and learning from each other, we feel that's really helpful. So on the next slide, you see another way of reporting or disclosing impacts on climate, but also on other capitals. This is an extract from our impact report, where we did an analysis called an integrated profit and loss, where we try to monetize positive and negative impacts on an annual basis for each of the capitals and for each of the stakeholders. It's quite a technical report. We're very happy with it because of the findings that or the learnings that we had during the development of the report. It was really interesting to see where our biggest impacts were on the different capitals, and it will be even more interesting to see how we are developing that over the years to come. And that is also kind of leading in to my next slide, where the objective is actually to steer. And this is a challenge because we are still developing the data on measuring and reporting, but we are eager to steer our portfolio in line with science-based targets, or with 2-degree scenarios, or in line with the scenarios that we are developing within TCFD requirements and CDP disclosures. So this slide actually tries to show that at the center for us as a bank, and maybe for other companies or other sectors as well, but is this carbon data or carbon accounting or greenhouse gas. Obviously it's broader than just CO2, but it's a necessary input for all these other topics. And our balance sheet is around 400 billion. So we have 500,000 corporate clients. We have 180 billion in investments from our private banking activities. And this is all data that we need to translate into carbon, and after that need to translate into target setting in scenarios and climate action. And I'll just share, we can't wait for everything to be perfect, so I thought I'd end with just one very practical example on the last slide. One of our biggest impacts is in our real estate portfolio. In our mortgage portfolio, it's 185 billion in size, and we know we will have to improve the sustainability of all these real estate entities that we finance. So we developed what we call Mission 2030, which means that by 2030 we want all the real estate financed by AMRO to have on average a label A, which is the most sustainable label that you can get. And we offer financing to our clients to do so, and we offer advice and insights. We don't know if this will bring us into a 2-degree or well below 2-degree scenario, but we do know that this is a major challenge, and it requires a lot of time and effort. So we thought this is something that we can do already to steer our portfolio into the right direction. And at the same time, we are developing science-based targets, different scenarios to support decisions that we are making here and to improve the steering as well. So for us, it's a 3-step approach. It's measure, report, and steer. And they don't have to wait on one another. You can do them simultaneously or at the same time. I would urge all companies, specifically financial institutions, to get going on this. So that's, I think, one more slide, and then I'm done for now and open to questions at the end. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Tjeerd. Thank you. And some very useful information, and a number of questions have come in. So just to confirm again to those asking the questions, I'll be asking questions of all speakers at the end of this. So, yeah, got some great questions in there, and very, very useful information. So, okay, you know, I don't know if many saw this. Only a couple of weeks ago, I saw the city minister, John Glenn. He announced that, you know, if large companies and asset owners don't effectively disclose climate risk by 2022, then the government, well, the UK government will make this a mandatory requirement. And Janice, you and I agree, irrespective of this announcement, there's more than enough reasons to undertake the TCFD process. And I know you've got some slides to bring attention to that, but also some really useful insights on how companies can go about this in, well, quite an innovative way, but maybe an obvious way when you start explaining it. So I'm going to try and bring up your slides now, Janice. And yes, welcome to the webinar, and thank you for joining us.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly, yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much for having me. Good afternoon from Hong Kong. So it's my end of the day, but the start of the day in Europe. So I'm very honored to been invited by Liam to speak about what we're doing at the Hong Kong and Shanghai hotels. The Hong Kong and Shanghai hotels owns and operates a number of luxury real estate properties around the world. In fact, particularly in London, we're actually building one of our flagship hotels, and it will be in Belgravia. And so we have a number of properties around the world, and this is something that we are very climate change is something that we're extremely concerned about from a business perspective. Liam, if you could move to the next slide. Hello?
Hello. Yes, it should
Okay,
be
perfect.
now viewable.
Yeah, got it. So yeah, so really, why do we have to do this apart from a lot of other reasons why, as Liam and previous speakers have already mentioned, the reasons why we should do this, but more importantly, we have never been so trendy before. I have worked on climate change for pretty much most of my adult life, and this is the first time I feel like I'm part of the trend. Every time I tell people what I'm working on, and most people understand sort of what climate change is. And so this is really the reason why public opinion has changed. And the reason I'm using the United States as an example is we know so well where the United States current administration is on this particular issue. But 6 in 10 Americans think global warming is mostly human caused. Only 7% do not believe in climate change and dismiss it outright. Unbelievably, 67% of Americans now agree to a carbon tax, obviously with some conditions. And some people have asked me, so why have most Americans, why have their why has their mindset shift? And that, as 76% have said, because of extreme weather events that they themselves have experienced in the US, has been the most influential factor shifting their views. What is interesting, and I haven't included here, is if you read the New York Times 2 days ago or yesterday, the current US administration has done, in fact, the US president has decided to do a speech on environmental leadership, and he talked about greenhouse gas emissions. If one of our greatest skeptics in the world wants to talk about greenhouse gas emissions, there's something we're doing right. And, the opinion on climate change has really shifted, and it's no longer so much whether climate change exists. The question now is how are we going to deal with it? So that's a great starting point in terms of trying to convince your senior management into looking into this more seriously. If we can move to the next slide. So what we're doing is we're trying to, here's a map of where all of our assets are around the world. And so we've already started to report on our some of the initial recommendations of TCFD. It's on our sustainability report. We did it first time this year. And what we're doing now, in fact, what we've been doing the past 2 months is I'm actually a climate change scientist by background. So I was just curious, and I was like, okay, if we're going to be starting to do a scenario study, and I also used to be a consultant in my previous life, I was just thinking, if a consultant decides to do a study on scenarios, where are they going to get this data? Surely the data must be public somehow, right? And so I asked my team and some of our interns to go and scour the web and look at every scenario of that's a scenario study strategy that's available in all of the cities we operate in. And lo and behold, nearly all of the countries and cities that we operate in have some peer-reviewed academic and or government agency source climate change RCP scenario and strategy. That is amazing. I didn't even know that was available, and they're all free. You literally can just download it. They are all in English, except for China. But the great thing is, I believe one of the colleges in the United States has done an insight study on China's climate change plan, and so we looked into it and we said, oh my gosh, what a treasure trove of information. In fact, my team and I joke about the fact that if aliens came after, we've all hopefully not been wiped out by climate change, but if we are, the aliens would be like, there's so much information about climate change and on scenarios, and yet we didn't do anything about it. And I was really surprised that this information was all there for free. they are not very easy to find. And so in the next slide, you'll see that we've given you, Liam, if you could go to the next slide. I'm not sure if you can just hover to one of the hyperlinks, but what my team has done is we are sharing with you all the links of all these scenarios. Yes, awesome. And also the different climate change strategies of all of these locations that we are located in. You're probably in you, some of your companies are located in other countries, but I'm sure most of your you have operations in China, you might have operations in Japan, or even in New York, Paris. So all of that, we were able to find all of this information online. And so, yeah, that's great. So what did we do? We collated all of this information. And if you go to the next slide, I'll just show you one of the sample. And I'm using Hong Kong because Hong Kong is where we are headquartered. And according to the Hong Kong, and this is literally, you can just go online and find this information. And they're saying these are the impacts of climate change in Hong Kong, and they have it through different scenarios, 2.5, 4.5, 8.5, and RCP is the term that they use in IPCC, the IPCC reports. And it basically shows you the low to high scenario, if low meaning if we are able to deal with climate change earlier and are able to reduce our emissions much more faster than ideally faster than we would like, and then same with the highest scenario, which is 8.5. And actually Hong Kong and most of the countries that we checked out has these scenarios publicly available. So it's pretty shocking when we saw this information. For example, right now it's summer in Hong Kong, and we cannot imagine consecutive warm days. At 2050, it will be from 8 to 16 days. And in 2100, it's going to be 7 to 28 days. That's pretty much 1 month of consecutive warm days. And in Hong Kong, if you've ever been to Hong Kong, the humidity of Hong Kong is pretty oppressive. So we were thinking, okay, how is that going to impact people working outside of the building? What about heat waves? How is that going to impact on the health of our staff? Will there be tourists coming to Hong Kong in the summer? This is our peak season. Will they be willing to travel to Hong Kong? So these are the questions we're now asking based on the information that we just collated from these publicly available documents. So if you move on to the next slide, what we've done as well is we said, okay, we have all of this information. We said, okay, what is the common story regardless of which location our operation is in, whether we're in our hotel in Paris or whether our hotel in Beijing, what do they have in common? And this should be no news to us. This is what we found in common: increasing warming, heat waves, and very hot days, decreasing minimum temperatures, increasing rainfall, sea level rise, impacts to agriculture. No surprise that the highest scenario of RCP 8.5 will show the highest impacts in terms of climate change. And then we obviously had to look at the differences. And we said, okay, what is the differences with the scenarios in Paris as opposed to Shanghai, as opposed to Tokyo? And what we found was, while there were commonalities, the differences were mostly which parts of the country will be heavily hit. And what we found was extreme events might vary as well. So let's say in Thailand, the Thai government, based on their scenarios, they've said there will be less typhoons, but there will be more rainy days, and hence that might mean that the rivers might overflow. A lot of the tourism sector in Thailand is actually built around rivers. They're built literally next to rivers. So how's that going to impact the tourism sector? And so does it mean that extreme events may vary that won't impact you? It will impact us in a different way. And so that was something that was very useful when we were looking into this data. The range of increases varied. So for example, Manila and Hong Kong and Bangkok are going to be experiencing some of the highest ranges of increases compared to other cities that we operate in. That was crucial for us being able to understand how we could renovate our buildings in the future. What was also interesting is a number of countries, particularly those where agriculture is such a heavy part of their, such a significant part of their economic sector. They talked really a lot about agriculture. some growing seasons will be shorter, some longer, and they even, like in Japan, they've even identified which agricultural products will be impacted and which won't be impacted. In fact, would benefit from longer growing seasons. This was interesting, the last bullet point. I found it really interesting. Out of all the countries or cities that we assessed, only 2 or 3 of these cities talked about water stress. And that is an issue that we are very concerned about, because obviously if you're going to stay in a hotel, you would like to take a shower. And for us to tell you that you cannot take a shower, I'm sure you're not going to be happy about that. So we are very concerned about the fact that a lot of governments haven't made the direct link of water stress and climate change. And so we know, based on our research, that we have to lobby governments to understand that you need to be part of this. You need to consider water stress when you think about climate change. And then if we could go to the next slide. So similarly, we also did the same thing for strategies. I'm not going to go into too much length about this, but what we found in common was renewable energy. Definitely, we need to be on that path. We need to have, because we are in the business of property or real estate, building efficiency and alternative fuel transport strategies. That's common whichever city you're talking about, whether it's Manila or whether it's Paris. And again, as I mentioned, very little on solutions to water stress, even on food security. The differences, what I found interesting was an increasing number of countries. I think half of the countries that we were looking into have already indicated that they were going to sign up to at least an 80% reduction of emissions by 2050. And that was crucial for us, because if we're creating a sustainability strategy for 2030, we wanted to make sure that we aligned with this policy direction from government. So if you move on to the next slide. So here's just a summary. So, okay, we said, okay, these are the common RCP scenarios, and these are the common strategies. And if we can go to the next slide again, I'll explain it a bit more. If you look at this pyramid, if you like, so now we're deciding, okay, if we're going to build our climate adaptation strategy, the foundation of this strategy will be based on what is common in the government strategies that we research and on its RCP scenarios. That will be the foundation of our group strategy. Then, so these will be principle based, if you like. Then we move on and we go to our hotels, our local operations. So we say, hey, Bangkok, this is what's unique about Bangkok, for example, this river example I just gave you. We will then ask, in fact, we're already having these discussions. We will ask the local operations to localize the group strategy, so that we can prepare each of our assets around the world. And then the last bit, the top bit really is, when we go and do business development, we have to be clear about which locations we're going to be entering, whether these locations are going to be climate resilient, whether these governments are prepared in terms of adapting to climate change. Because even if we design our hotels to be climate resilient, people still need to get to the airport, from the airport, get to the hotel. That's not within our control. So we need to make sure that those dots are connected, and that the government infrastructure is there in place for us to be able to do business in that city. I give an example here as well. A small example. If there is an increase of 50% heat days in our city, I just gave that as an example in Hong Kong. What does that mean for us? Will we be able to find staff to want to work in these conditions? How crucial is it for staff to be working outdoors? And how will they be able to adapt? Should we adapt as a company? Meaning, should we have outdoor workers or not? And when should we do it? Since we're talking about 2050, should we be doing it in 2030 or 2045 or even 2025? So these are the questions we're now asking ourselves. That was triggered by the data that we collated from online. And I think this one might be my last slide. The next slide. Yes. So now we've, as I said, we've already collated all of this data points, all of this information on strategies from the different countries that we operate in. And now what we've done is we've categorized some of the potential impacts into these 5 buckets. And if you see, each one has some of the stakeholders that's listed, because when you're going to do what we found when you're doing TCFD scenarios, there's only so much the sustainability team can do. You really need to work in partnership with you need to do a lot of cross collaboration with the departments within your business. So in our case, this is how we're doing it. This is really real time that what we're doing right now. So we are seriously thinking about asset protection. Our valuation as a real estate company is significantly based on our assets, on hard assets. And so we need to be able to protect our assets. And so this is something that we're seriously looking into, speaking to our insurers, speaking to our finance team and our building engineers. We're also looking into our business model impacts. How is that going to impact the way people are booking, or the way people are going to be traveling, the way people are going to be, deciding to go on holiday? How is that going to impact our business? I already talked about labor impacts through heat days, very hot days, and how that's going to impact outdoor workers. Definitely social right to operate. If the cities we operate in decided to sign up to net zero impact by 2050, we have no excuse not to align with that target. And so, that's one of the things we're looking into. And lastly, how is this going to impact on our operating costs and impacts? Does that mean that if we used to buy perhaps, let's say in Chicago, if we used to buy just around Illinois, and I don't know, maybe Illinois no longer can take care of some of our food sources, does that mean we have to, where do we buy food? Do we buy it in Canada? Do we buy it 2 states away from Illinois? Is that going to increase our operating costs? So these are the questions that we're now asking today based on the information that we have. And then the last thing I wanted to say as well is you need board and senior management buy-in. TCFD scenarios, we found anyway, cannot be done just on the fly and very subtly. Because some of the questions you're going to be asking are very inconvenient and very difficult questions. And some of the questions I get are things like, oh, well, that's going to happen in 2050 or 2100. We'd be dead by then. But then you're like, yeah, but that's not the point. The point is, for us as a business anyway, for HSH, we are a 152-year-old business. And we have one majority shareholder, super majority shareholder. And it's been held by this family for 4 generations. And for us, we don't think in 50 years time, we think in 150 years time. And that's, I would say I'm just lucky in that sense that our senior management think really long term, and you really need a senior management team that thinks that long term as well. So again, as said, if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them later after our last panel speaker. Thanks, Liam.
Thank you, Janice. Thank you. And there's quite a few questions that have come through, so we'll try and get to them once Christopher has finished, has undergone his presentation. We still have some time to get through the questions. So yes, over to the final speaker. So as highlighted at the beginning, there are benefits of undertaking the task of disclosing climate impact and the opportunities that they bring. So Chris, I know you have some great insights from your work at UBQ Materials. So I'm just going to bring you in now and hopefully bring up the final slide. So yes, if you can get us underway.
Yeah, hi Liam, thanks again, and it's great to be part of this webinar today. As you said, I'm joining in with more of a specific business case in the context of how accurately reporting climate impacts has really been central to underscore UBQ's core technology purpose and positioning our value propositions through a more measured and certified proofs point of view. Next slide. But if we first, for those of you who haven't heard about UBQ Materials yet, we have spent the last many years in stealth mode developing a breakthrough advanced waste conversion technology that produces sustainable bio-based materials that can actually displace conventional plastic materials. So when we say waste, we do mean residual municipal solid waste, including food waste, the banana peels to chicken bones, to dirty paper, cardboard, and the typically unrecycled plastics. We're then able to reduce this waste feedstock into its more basic natural components, cellulose, sugars, fibers, lignin, etc., and actually reconstitute and bind them together into a new bio-based composite, the UBQ material, which, as you can see in point 3, industry can use to make the everyday familiar products that they produce today just much more sustainably. Next slide. But it's really important to note that we position our solution truly at the end of the waste value chain or hierarchy to ensure that we're actually closing the loop on unsustainable waste disposal and divert the residual waste directly from landfills. I know this is a very brief intro, so please do reach out after or check out our website to learn more about the technology itself. Next slide. Now, to really be able to start to unpack what the real climate impact of our solution was, we needed an external third-party expertise to be able to guide, develop, monitor, and really audit our operations. We have been blessed to have been introduced to Glenn Frommer from ESG Matters and Qantas International, working with their amazing team in Lausanne. And both have been absolutely critical to UBQ sustainability reporting, positioning, and ultimately able to be part of really verifying and certifying our resulting claims. Next slide, please. So much of the work that we completed with Glenn and Qantas centered around a comprehensive life cycle analysis, where we really dove into all of the aspects of the core conversion process through to the resulting impact of the UBQ material itself. So first, we started specifically with understanding what the true baseline emission reductions were for the waste feedstock that we were processing. So using the CDM methodology, we calculated baseline emissions of methane from solid waste disposed or prevented from disposal at a solid waste disposal site, or otherwise known as a landfill. So diving into the granular detail of this calculation, we reviewed all of the IPCC and CDM default data, inputs, variables, parameters, as well as inputting core UBQ sourced specific project data. This led to a much more accurate and robust assessment of the baseline emission reductions that are unique to the UBQ solution. Then, of course, in tandem, we also assessed the UBQ project activity itself and its impact, addressing all of the inputs and outputs of our solution. Now, the impact results here were nominal, given that we've really developed a closed-loop system, meaning that our solution consumes zero water, it produces zero waste, zero effluents, and zero emissions. It's also highly energy efficient, where we consume a tenth of that required to produce comparable conventional plastics. So the combination of these two, the baseline and the UBQ project activity, is what effectively results in the net life cycle analysis and gives the climate impact, let's say, per ton of the UBQ material produced. So after a critical peer review and audit of the granular detail calculations, we were able to get the final results certified in a credible and transparent manner. Next slide, please. And these results were truly astounding. I mean, actually positioning the UBQ material as the most climate positive thermoplastic material available in the market today, to the best of our knowledge, where for every 1 ton of the UBQ material produced, we're actually reducing or avoiding 11.7 tons of CO2 equivalent emissions. So compared to, for example, polypropylene, which produces 2.8 tons of CO2 in production, this equates to a total offset value of 14.5 tons of CO2 equivalent. I mean, that's huge. Now, what does this actually mean for UBQ or for industry, our prospective customers, our partners? Next slide, please. Well, as a starting point, this means that at relatively low loading levels, their product application can actually become carbon neutral. So given industry is quite conservative or even risk adverse, having tried and tested many new materials over the years, this gave them a trigger to test the UBQ formulations we have developed. So this has both proven to open doors, accelerate discussions with customers, and lead UBQ effectively to monetize our material's climate impact. But also specifically, because all of this has been verified and certified by credible third-party service providers, it really garners trust having done most of the groundwork in advance. Next slide, please. So to take this actually one step even further, UBQ is now introducing what we call a climate impact data sheet for all of our different master batch and compound formulations as a part of the other typical forms of documentation, standard to material sales, like technical or safety data sheets. And this has really set us apart from others and underscores our commitment to transparency around the UBQ climate impact itself. Last slide, please. So just to quickly round off, key takeaways would really be that expertise is critical. Transparent reporting is required, and accountability is expected. I don't know if any of you are going to be attending the upcoming conference in October, but I'll be speaking much more at length about the different scenario analyses of current and future climate risks, where I also raise some perspectives around what we call the metric conundrum, specifically talking about short-lived climate pollutants like methane and their global warming potential multipliers. But yeah, thank you for today.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you. Yes, great presentation. And now we're going to move over to Q&A aspect, and there's a lot of questions to get through. So what I'm going to do is ask all panelists, obviously address the question, but try and keep your answers as succinct as possible, and then that way we can try and get through as many of these as possible. So harping back to Dan, your presentation, you said you highlight there's lessons to be learnt from the power sector. Are you able to highlight maybe a couple of lessons or a couple key things that you identified through analysis of the kind of the leaders, so to say, and if there's any companies that people that are listening can look up and see how they've undertaken that reporting approach?
Very quickly, yeah, because I appreciate the time. We essentially, because they're the sort of the front end, and they've often had to move more quickly on these sort of things, so they would have had more robust reporting practices in place, and will be having to move faster in terms of looking at the next generation of investments that they're going to have to make. They're definitely going to be at the front end of any forthcoming regulations and so on. So yeah, I would recommend people just to go to our website. You can look up the responses free of charge through cdp.net, and if there's any particular utilities that are operating in your region, go and have a look in their responses and just look at how they're dealing with some of these investment issues, capex, and you don't want to have stranded assets in a number of years. So they've had to make a lot of those difficult decisions already, and are making sort of more positive investments for the future. So yeah, there's a lot of data within those responses that you can really dig into.
Brilliant, thank you. Tjeerd, we had quite a few questions around the platform for carbon accounting financials. A couple around, is it focused solely on financial institutions at the moment? A couple of, I suppose, a couple of questions from people maybe from other sectors looking to see if they can be part, or ways they can be involved, or so a bit of clarity there. And secondly, do you see a future where financial institutions will assist their portfolio to carry out scenario analysis based on the expertise that you guys are building?
Yeah, thanks for the questions. The platform is currently mainly open and focused towards the challenges of financial institutions. Financing a lot of companies, big numbers. How do you assess for climate? How do you account for climate? If companies feel that they are interested or would like to know more, please reach out and we'll discuss. So open to that. To your second question, in the future, will banks or financial institutions either insist, or was that the question, Liam? Could you just repeat that?
Yes, based on the expertise you guys are building up around the scenario analysis, will you be, do you reckon there'll be a situation where you'll be assisting your clients in your portfolio with the scenario analysis?
Yeah, that is open at the moment. Banks are not doing that. It's also a competitive field with let's say, more consultancy-based firms. But our intention is to support our clients in the transition to become more sustainable. So, and I think TCFD and climate disclosures and scenarios are helpful in that sense. So it would make a good fit for us to support our clients in that sense as well. I think we would have to stay clear of more the consultants' role that other companies are playing. But there was a mutual interest because banks want to ensure that their clients are future-proof. Because if they're not, then we will not get our money back, right? So that is the linking pin that could push us into that direction.
Yeah, I definitely agree on that. And Janice, there was a couple of questions around. Well, firstly, there was a couple of people that thanked you for highlighting the 3 data points. So just to confirm, what I'll be doing is actually uploading the webinar slides to a link so people can click on those, which is something we don't normally do, but I will do because obviously there's a lot of important links. So quite a few thank yous there. But secondly, around obviously there's the assumptions that you're now making a potential impact. How is that playing out, and when you're engaging with the board and talking about potential investments, or as you say in the lobbying in certain areas, is that something that I know you said there's a generational kind of long-term view within your organisation? So is that something that you're engaging easily with the board? Are you seeing aspects of this engagement that's resonating that you can share with others that when they take it to their board that they can use as kind of ideas or tools to get that buy-in and get that support? Hello, Janice. I believe you're muted your end. Are you able to? There we are.
Yeah, unmuted now. Yes. Well, you're welcome. When I found out it was free, I was just like, I have to tell other people who was working in this industry. And then our team thought maybe we should just give the links as well, because it took us probably like 2 weeks to find everything, and just we didn't want to reinvent the wheel. So yes, I will let the team know that there was a big thank you to them as well.
Brilliant. Thank you.
So what resonated with the board was when we showed them the common scenarios. So we just said to them, every country and city that has done a scenario on climate change is saying this. And that was so compelling and powerful for the board to see it for themselves, that the story, it's almost like this. There's a story on climate change, and the plot is not changing regardless of which country or location you're referring to. What is changing is just how varied the impacts are going to be. Like, as I mentioned, increase of temperature may be a bit higher in Manila and Bangkok than it would be perhaps in Chicago. So for the board to be able to see it and say, this is actually scenarios coming from governments, and this is how we should be planning for the future, it was very compelling for them. The question about this generational point of view, I find that it's when I go and speak to other companies, because a lot of companies in Hong Kong and in Asia are also interested in learning about how we're doing our TCFD scenarios. I often get asked, well, my company doesn't really think in 50-year time frames. They think more in 3-year time frames. And the way we explain it is, particularly if you're in a real estate sector, you don't build a building for it to be devalued in 5 years' time or in 10 years' time. That's not why you're in the business of real estate. And so we tell them the whole point about eventually what might happen is these companies that might be thinking short term may no longer be in business if this is how they're thinking, because you can't plan for climate change in 3-year timeframes. You're going to have to plan it in longer timeframes. So unfortunately, my answer would be we must be able to get people, our senior management thinking about these things in the long term.
Brilliant, thank you. And Christopher, there's a couple of questions around here, and it comes to the point of once I suppose selling your product to potential customers, and obviously the benefits that it will bring to their impact. Have you considered using the verification route to sell the product, and how are you engaging on such technical data in a way that maybe with buyers that maybe don't have that, I suppose, that level of understanding? So maybe a 2-pronged part to that question.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I mean, first of all, being able to look at what is their current material formulation is also that they have to kind of release some information in order for us to be able to from a climate impact data sheet point of view, be able to give them a before and after adopting the UBQ material scenario assessment. We start off with a tentative assessment, and then we would bring in, for example, Quantis, that would be the third party that would be able to both look at our customers' impact and then the impact of our material, and be able to produce a final climate impact data sheet for that. The verification is on really all sides of the equation. So it's both for our production and the audit of our facilities. It's for our customers, material sources, for their actual product manufacturing. So it's quite a comprehensive process, but many of those big customers that we have been working have already gone through that, so that material is already available. And ultimately, we provide them with all the verifications that we have gotten in to date, and then they can take that the next step further of then how do they start to use that within their own reporting. We're still very much a startup going into growth phase. So this is very much a learning process for us as well. And that's why we very much lean and rely on the individuals like Glenn Frommer and Quantis to help guide and position exactly these types of elements.
Thank you, Chris. And unfortunately, I see that a lot of time is now flashing on the software, and I know we've already gone over by a couple of minutes, and our speakers' times and also the listeners' times are scarce. So I just want to thank you for all joining today's webinar. The webinar is part of the knowledge exchange in the build-up to this year's Sustainability Reporting and Communication Summit. For those that asked a number of questions we didn't get around to, apologies for not getting around to them. We'll produce some more analysis in the build-up to the event around this very topical and very challenging area. This is also, climate disclosures is also just one key focus area of the event, and where we'll be having Tjeerd, Janice, Christopher, and one of Daniel's colleagues joining us at the event alongside a number of C-suite and senior level speakers. So if you're interested to know more about the event, the web link's on your screen now, ethicalcorp.com/reporting. As highlighted through the discussion, recordings from today's webinar will be sent out towards the end of next week, so do keep an eye out for my email. I'll just take this final moment just to thank you all for joining us, all listening in, and to thank Tjeerd, Janice, Christopher, and Daniel for sparing your time and your insights. I, for one, I found it very interesting, and I know a number of comments I've had through people submitting feedback, so thanking you all for your feedback and help. So thank you, yes, and until next time, all the very best, and take care. Bye-bye.